Okay, so this is question number one. If you look at it, this is the first one's an example of question number one. We have Bob Company's most recent income statement, and we're given information, and then we're trying to determine what's going to happen if our volume increases by 30 units, and then I have it decreasing or declining by 30 units. So the first thing we have to figure out is currently, with the income statement we're given, how many units are being sold. And to do that, you just take your total sales and divide it by your sales per unit, and that would tell you how many units you're dealing with in the income statement given. So in the first example, if we decrease it by 30 units, it's going to be 9,970, or excuse me, we're increasing by 30 units, I'm sorry. So it's going to give us 10,030 units. So we simply take our sales price per unit and multiply it by the number of units to determine our total sales. For our variable expenses, we take our variable expense cost per unit, multiply it by the total units, and that'll give us our total variable expenses. If we subtract the variable expense from the sales, that gives us our contribution margin. Then we subtract our fixed expenses, and that gives us net operating income. I'm doing the same thing, and the way we got the $19 was the same thing. You take your total variable expenses, which were $190,000, divide them by the per unit amount, which was 19, and that gave us 10,000 units. So you get the same thing. What we're doing for the second situation is we're decreasing our units by 30. So that now we're dealing with a total of 9,970. So again, we're just going to take our total items or total units, multiply it by the sales price per unit to come up with 293,280. Take our variable cost per unit of 19, multiply it by the total of 9,970. That gives us 189,430. If we subtract the variable expense from the sales, we get a contribution margin of 49,850. Fixed expenses do not change; they're the same, 44,000. We subtract that from our contribution margin, it gives us net operating income of 15,850. So you'll do the same thing with your homework. There is one more problem, I believe, in your homework for number one, and that's just solving, basically doing the same thing, and they give you the number of units. For problem number two, we have last month when Bob sold 20,000 unit, total sales were 100,000, variable expenses were 60, and fixed expenses were 10. And we want to know the company's contribution margin ratio. So to determine, first of all, what we have to figure out is the contribution margin, which is our sales of 100,000 minus 60,000 in variable expenses, and that gives us a 40,000 contribution margin. For the contribution margin ratio, we're dividing that $40,000 contribution margin by our sales of 100,000, and that gives us 40% of 0.4. We now can go ahead and now that we have that information, we can go ahead and figure out the rest of the problem. And it's saying estimate the change in the company's net operating income if it were to increase its total sales by 1,000. So what we do is we have our change in total sales of 1,000. All we have to do, quick way, we just multiply it by our contribution margin ratio, 40% or 0.4, and that gives us our change in net operating income. So it's a real quick way to figure that out. And now on to number three. We're given selling price, variable expense, and contribution margin, both per unit and as a percent of sales. For Bob Company, we're given our fixed expenses are given as 80,000, and the marketing manager believes by increasing monthly advertising by 3,000, we can increase sales by 6,000. And we want to calculate the increase or decrease in net operating income. So the first thing is our contribution margin increase. That's going to be our sales, which are going to increase by 6,000. So our sales increase of 6,000, and we're going to multiply that by our contribution margin ratio, which is 30%, and that gives us 1,800. We're going to then subtract our fixed expenses, which increased by 3,000. That gives us a decrease in net operating income of 1,200. So should we do this? The answer is no. We would decrease our net operating income. We don't want to do it.